ISIS fighters surrendering in Syria. What do we do with those guys? And pandemonium as violence erupts on the border of Venezuela. It's another chaotic day across the globe, but there's hope for a better tomorrow. All that is coming up on today's edition of The Hot Zone.
This is The Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Well, things are about as crazy as they've ever been in the two places I just visited, Syria and Venezuela. If you've been following me on my travels, you probably have a better understanding by now of what's going on in those two crises than like 99% of the people on the planet. So you're welcome. Do me a favor, take a minute and share this podcast with your friends. You know, there's a lot of hurt and heartache and mayhem happening every day in this world, and it can get pretty depressing if all you do is read about it and hear about it all the time on the news. So with the Hot Zone, I don't want to just give you the depressing truth as I experience it on the ground. I want to do something about it directly with your help. And we can do so much. Look, there's another podcast I saw the other day out there that has 11,000 Patreon supporters. And the guy doesn't even go anywhere. He just sort of comments on the news in a irreverent and pretty profane way, really. And he's pulling in like $65,000 a month doing it. Can you imagine how much good we could do with $65,000 a month? I mean, come on, join me. Let's go change the way news gets done. Let's go together into the world's hot zones and help the people who are affected. Go to patreon.com/hotzone and become part of what we're doing. So thanks. Well, Syria has had some powerful developments in the past week, and I'll get to that. But first, let's look at the pandemonium that happened in Cúcuta, Colombia over the weekend. Now, here's a piece I've got airing today on the 700 Club that kind of sums up what happened. Pandemonium over the weekend as the supporters of interim President Juan Guaido attempted to get truckloads of humanitarian aid into Venezuela from Colombia and Brazil. National Guard troops loyal to dictator Nicolas Maduro blocked bridges to stop the aid, which Maduro claims is part of a U.S.-led coup against him. In Brazil, troops shot and killed 2 protesters and wounded 12 more on Friday. Lester Toledo, a representative of Guaido's party, leads the effort to get across the border. Days earlier, he talked of success.
23 of February, in this bridge, you're gonna be a witness of a humanitarian tsunami that will be around here, and we're coming into Venezuela with this humanitarian aid.
But things didn't go as planned. Saturday, thousands of desperate Venezuelans, led by Juan Guaido himself, tried to run the blockades and deliver 235 tons of American aid to their countrymen. By mid-afternoon, the effort fell apart as Venezuelan forces torched 4 aid trucks and fired tear gas at hungry protesters. Just across the border, criminal gangs loyal to Maduro looted stores and attacked those supporting the aid effort. As hopes for change went up in smoke, protesters expressed frustration with the Venezuelan troops standing against them.
We beg the National Guard to put themselves on the side of the Venezuelans. To think of your children, think of your families.
Other Venezuelans told us though the aid hasn't yet made it, they're grateful for the American support.
I know that God is with us all the time, and we have to tell you thank you to the American people, because we need you really.
Chuck Holton, CBN News, Cúcuta, Colombia. Now, as you remember, I returned from Cúcuta only a few days ago. And when I left, everybody was looking forward to Saturday when they said they'd blast through those barricades thrown up by the Venezuelan government and then send tons of American aid rolling into the needy people of that country. Well, it didn't turn out to be quite that easy. At dawn on Saturday, you look at that bridge, the Venezuelan forces had blockaded all of them. All the bridges from Cúcuta to Venezuela were blocked. They deployed riot gear-clad troops all along the border. It took several hours for Juan Guaido, the interim president, to get his people marshaled that morning on Saturday. And then trucks full of aid, which were at the Tienditas bridge, only a few hundred meters from the border, had to take another couple hours to get moving because there were so many press in the way, they couldn't go very fast. You should have seen it. Well, because the Tienditas bridge was actually really impassable, they drove the trucks to the north and south crossings. The one in the north is called Urania, and the one in the south is Simon Bolivar Bridge. And that's where things started to go sideways. The first 3 trucks that made it to the barricades in Urania were set on fire by Venezuelan troops, and that blocked that bridge completely. Then on the other bridge, there was a lot of rock throwing and tear gas shooting, and nothing still got through. I'm told there were more than 300 injuries, along with 2 deaths over the weekend due to all that violence. Now, here and there, a few Venezuelan troops decided to switch sides. That's great. Grand total of 60 Venezuelan soldiers crossed over Saturday, but they were all low-ranking officers and NCOs from what I understand. And that wasn't near enough to cause Maduro any hardship or cause him to lose any sleep. It kind of makes you wonder how he continues to hold that kind of sway over the military. I mean, is he threatening their families? I guess if you knew your family would disappear if you joined the resistance, that'd probably be a good reason to maintain the status quo. In the meantime, however, millions of Venezuelans are starving. And that might be hard for Maduro to fathom since that dude's like 300 pounds. I mean, he's obviously never missed a meal. But if there's going to be any real change with an unarmed populace that can't do anything against the military, then it's going to likely only come when a general or some other flag officer in Venezuela's military defects with his entire unit. Now, the CIA could probably make that happen with the judicious application of a few $1 million in cash. But it'll still likely be bloody whenever that happens and the coup comes. Remember, Maduro is surrounded at all times by private military contractors from Russia and Cuba. He doesn't trust his own generals or troops to protect him, so it's likely it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I don't think Maduro's the winner of Saturday's standoff by any stretch. It can't be good for his image for him to be burning aid while starving people stand there and watch. Also, I heard from one of my contacts just across the border that Maduro sent his colectivos, which are armed gangs of thugs, many of them just let out of prison, to terrorize the people on the Venezuelan side of the border. They looted stores on Saturday and roughed up residents, especially in San Antonio de Venezuela, where a friend of mine lost his shoe store to those colectivos, those gangs. These are the actions of a desperate tyrant. That's all there is to it. So let's listen to my short interview with the Colombian ambassador to the United States that I got last Sunday right there on the Simon Bolivar Bridge. He had some pretty cool things to say.
No, this is even though the dictator is saying that this is a provocation, the only answer that we have for him is that this is an act of love. This is an act of Christianity. This is an act that shows the moral compass of those who cannot stand by seeing the suffering of millions and millions of Venezuelans that come across this bridge dying of hunger, dying because of lack of medicine. What we have, our best allies are the media, so that they can show the brutality of the dictatorship and they can show the moral courage of these guys. They have been in jail, they have been tortured, they are exiled. These are the heroes. We're just workers helping them recover their country.
Thank you very much. Now, on the subject of the 200 plus tons of American aid, which are still, as of this moment, on the Colombian side of the border, think about this. The U.S. State Department estimates this aid is going to be sufficient for something like 40,000 people. Now, let's say they figure out a way to double that. There are 500,000 needy Venezuelans in Cúcuta alone, to say nothing of the tens of millions of Venezuelans inside the country. So that aid isn't going to solve any problems. Think of it as a lever with which the civilized world is sort of trying to pry loose Maduro's stranglehold on power without actually dropping bombs on anybody. But it might come to that as well. Juan Guaido is meeting with Vice President Pence and other leaders today in Bogota to discuss his options. It's pretty likely the United States is going to levy more sanctions against the Maduro regime, to include kicking out the families of Venezuelan military and government workers who are living the high life in Miami right now and thus insulated from the horrors of Caracas and Maracaibo. It's clear Saturday's attempt to truck American aid into Venezuela was a publicity stunt for the interim president Juan Guaido. That's not a bad thing. But no matter how many countries recognize him as the legitimate leader of Venezuela, This is not going to matter until the military gets behind him. So far, that hasn't happened, but there are now even more calls for massive international response, and Maduro's not gaining any popularity points either at home or abroad. So we'll see what happens. All right, let's move on to Syria. Since I left 2 weeks ago, the Free Burma Rangers team I was with, and Dave Eubank, they've continued to help those escaping that final bastion of ISIS from the little town called Baghouz. They've steadily moved closer to the fighting, and now they're at a place where they can receive those who escape Baghouz directly. They're literally looking at the fighting. Well, what was a few hundred people a day has now turned into several thousand people a day. It looks like the people we talked to when I was there, they weren't exaggerating when they said there were 10 to 20,000 people still stuck inside. And virtually all of those getting out now are ISIS fighters and their families. But they're giving themselves up, surrendering, starving, many wounded, and just done.
Good job, Ilya. Thank you, Lord. This little baby just delivered by Ilya and team, born here on 22 February 2019.
The question is, what do you do with ISIS fighters when they surrender? Well, it's a really tough question to ask because many say we ought to just send them back to hell where they belong. But that's sort of against the generally accepted rules of war, and you could make a case that these people don't deserve those protections. I get that. But I don't think you can really defeat the idea that ISIS represents by becoming like ISIS. I mean, the ISIS fighters should be tried for crimes against humanity, without a doubt. They should never be allowed into society again, in my opinion. But most of them are foreigners at this point. They're not from Syria, and their home countries don't really want them back. So they'll likely languish in some horror show of a prison in Syria or someplace until they either get repatriated or die. We shouldn't allow any of these jokers to go to Gitmo. I've been to that prison on the American base in Cuba, and the living conditions there are far and away better than anything these ISIS fighters have known their entire lives. They have beds, they have showers, they have electricity, entertainment, safety. Now, none of these jokers deserves any of that. Now, one side of me says they chose to live a medieval life in their self-proclaimed caliphate over the last 4 years. Let them keep living in medieval conditions. Let their lives be nasty, brutish, and short. The other side of me says we should show them the love of Christ. But see, here's the difference. That's my job personally.
So we've got a group of former ISIS fighters that have given themselves up, and they've been moved to this collection point just a mile or so away from the fighting. And some of them are wounded, some of them are sick. So I'm taking some pills over there to them. The Bible says that we should do to others what we would want them to do for us. And it doesn't really say anything about whether they're qualified or whether they deserve any help from us, because if that were the case, then we wouldn't get any help from God either. So I'm going to go ahead and help these guys and hope that maybe their hearts will change.
Not the job of the government. Romans 13 makes that pretty clear. That chapter says the government is an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the evildoer. So the American military, the Syrian Democratic Forces, and anybody else on the side of civilized society should send their forces to destroy every last vestige of ISIS, and then keep the pressure on them to deny them the ability to carry out their brutality anywhere ever again. But that's going to take a lot more than bombing Baghouz into dust, which it pretty much already is. A lot more. As a matter of fact, one way we could do that is to take very good care of the wives and children of the ISIS fighters. You know, many of them I talked to didn't even choose to be wives of ISIS fighters, right? I mean, wrong place, wrong time. It was that kind of thing. What I saw on the ground when I was there were lots of women who were so thankful to be out of that ISIS hellhole, even though they'd been told repeatedly that the only thing awaiting them when they got to the SDF lines was rape and torture. They were really amazed when we started giving out stuffed animals and candy. And I believe with the right amount of grace, many of those women and children might just grow up to be the most staunchly anti-radical Islamist people on the planet because they lived it. So let's show them a better way. But frankly, that would take a level of commitment that I'm not sure America is prepared to give. And it's hard to say I blame them, I guess. But we'll see. And, when on that topic, we talk about this ISIS wife who is from Alabama and she wants to come back to the United States. Well, don't get those two things mixed up. I, as a Christian, would say, I want to show her grace. If she's in need, I would help her. But that doesn't mean I think the government should show her grace. Because again, according to Romans 13, their job is to be the avenger against the evildoer. All right, so that's about it for today. The podcast is pretty quick, going to be going up on opslens.com. So go check that place out. It's a media site exclusively produced by veterans and special ops types. They've got a pretty amazing following. And so if you found us through OpsLens, thanks for joining us. I got more trips planned very soon. If you're a patron, you have some input into where I go next and what you want to hear about. So check out our Patreon page if you haven't already. There's some other cool benefits there too, like free copies of my books. So we'll see you back here tomorrow. I'm Chuck Holton. Thanks for being a part of The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.